Good morning. We continue our journey in Hemshech Samach Vav. We're on page 31. After explaining the whole tichla isikates for every end has a beginning, every beginning has an end, that the kav, the main artery, main energy source that enters into the chol component, the space after the tzimtzum, post-tzimtzum kav, affected by the tzimtzum, causes it to be a structured kav with a beginning and an end, and in turn, the kav therefore can create and shape and define all the parameters of existence. And we learned some of those parameters in the previous pages, all the way from the top of the kav, ak, akudim, nekudim, Atzilus, Tikkun, Bri, Yitzir, Asiya, and then the spheres in each one of these worlds. By contrast, the Ohr Ein Sof Finite tzimtzum that he began discussing at the bottom of page 30 is Mamalakol Makmachol Meresh Vad Sefer B'Shava. It's omnipresent, all pervasive, which is in direct contrast to the Kav, because the Kav is not B'Chol Makom B'Shava. Exact opposite. Every place is different. It creates diversity, the levels, the gradations. Okay, now that we know that there's these two states of, they call it divine consciousness. One is a finite one and limited one, and one is an infinite, all omnipresent one. So we come back to the very purpose of existence, and that is our avodah, our work, to actually fill the chol malkim pani with the oir, not just of the kav, but of the Ohr Ein Sof Finite tzimtzum. So that's how it will be in the future. As we learned earlier, and he explains here, in the future, says, V'chein la'osid la'osid, then the Atzmus Ohr Ein Sof, the way it's before the tzimtzum, will be here filling the entire existence. So this higher consciousness, this infinite consciousness, and all pervasive, all omnipresent consciousness will be on earth. And the different proofs that he brought, there will no longer be a veil, and there won't be tzimtzumim. It'll be menucha l'chayei elomim, the shvisa, the rest, R-E-S-T, as in rest and calm, and a cessation of the tzimtzumim of Vayechal Elokim, like we say about Shabbos. And here we're talking about the Elef HaShvi, which is like the Shabbos in the millennia. Also is divided into 6 millennia, 6 days of the week, and the 7th millennium. And even before coming to the future, La'asid Laveh, we already had something like this in our time, meaning in our history, and that is the Beis HaMikdash, and specifically the Holy of Holies, where the Shekhinah resided between the two rods, between the two rods of the Ark, and in general, all the Beis HaMikdash in general, which is where the Jews would go and make a pilgrimage 3 times a year in order to see and be seen. It means there was a Gilui Elokus there, mamish. What about today, after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash? He says, Me'ein zeh hu gam ken achshav b'chol Shabbos v'Shabbos. Me'ein zeh, like a similar taste of this, we have it every Shabbos. Because Shabbos is the Shavas Mat Tzimtzumim, like we said. It's a rest of these Tzimtzumim, of these concealments. Obviously, you can't say a rest of all the concealments, because then Shabbos, then we wouldn't have a world as we have it. But relatively speaking, compared to the work days, it's a rest of the tzimtzumim, which is the reason that Shabbos L'Hashem, which is the reason that there's the Issa Melacha b'Shabbos. It's forbidden to work on Shabbos, because work is a expression of Elokus that's connected to tzimtzum, connected to a world where the work days, and we're involved in the development of this world. That comes from Elokim. And why is that? Because man de machve b'machve kadam malka. When you're standing before the king, every movement that's outside of honoring the king, meaning any having total bittul, is considered a mutiny, is considered a rebellion against the king. So Shabbos, we are in the presence of the king, in presence of Elikus. So therefore, the meyachel mutter, in the weekdays, it's mutter work, because Elikus is concealed there in the work days, but Shabbos, it is asher siyas melach. And then he brought a few more proofs to this in the meals that we eat on Shabbos. So in general, you eat a meal, even though you need it for your sustenance, but the meal itself is not a mitzvah. You can use it for a mitzvah. Shabbos, the mitzvah of Einik Shabbos, is to eat and drink. So he says, because weekdays there's a taruv ra, there's still waste in the food. Not just physical waste, spiritual waste as well. Whereas on Shabbos, perish Shabbatchem, there's no perish Shabbatchem. It's kulei tev without taruves, similar to the food that will be eaten l'ased lavi, where there will not be any waste, any taruves ra. And so too is it today. Shabbos, Gili Ohr Ein Sof, Shemei Lamata b'Shabbos, Momel Yispar de Kopele Oven. So all those that affect destruction will be scattered, will be fragmented, will be eliminated. And that's where we stopped. So bottom line, to sum up what we've learned, is he's telling us that after explaining the kav and the whole seder hishtalshlus, that there is a structure to existence, we have the ased love, this will be transformed through our avodah. And we have a taste of it in the Beis Hamikdash and every Shabbos. Now he's going to continue and say here are other ways where we experience the Ohr Ein Sof before the tzimtzum. Because again, the kav creates existence. That's the structure of existence. Our job is to go beyond the structure, is to elevate the structure. So here is that yet another. So he's going to say this is now through Torah. He's going to talk about Torah. So on the bottom of page 31, the new paragraph, 4 lines from the bottom, pages can be found at samachvav.com. It says, V'chein b'ham shacha shayidei Torah, and say the same is with the hamshacha, with the energy that we transmit through Torah. Shenim shagam kein b'chinas gili Ohr Ein Sof lamata. Through Torah, we draw down Ohr Ein Sof down below. Because the root of the hamshacha through Torah is drawn from the Ohr Ein Sof before the tzimtzum. As I said, the kav also comes from before the tzimtzum, but it's measured in order to create existence. Torah is now elevating existence. So Torah draws from Ohr Ein Sof lifnei tzimtzum, similar to what he said about Shabbos, similar to what he said about the Beis Hamikdash. Ukamesha kosav, vayhi keil ma'al l'rakia. Like the pasuk says, there was a voice from above the heaven. What does that mean? From above rakia. So he says v'yadua, and below in the footnotes gives you the sources for this. It's known the koi that this refers to, this voice, al keil haTorah, on the voice of Torah, the sound of Torah, shalamayla ma'arakia hamafsik. Rakia is another partition. You say rakia is a heaven or an atmosphere. Rakia is a form of a partition, like a curtain. The sky. Rakia has many levels. We learned about them in Ayin Beis at length, about the parsais, the different partitions, the different shrouds, the different separations and veils. So when you say keil ma'al l'rakia, you're talking about Torah that's higher than the rakia, that mafsik, that separates. The b'sharshe, what is the root of all separation? All of these partitions. Hu b'chinas tzimtzum addition. That's the first of all. Because before the tzimtzum, there was no separations. Everything is one seamless, as we said, all-encompassing, omnipresent divine consciousness. The root of all these hafsakas, of all these partitions, all these pauses, is the tzimtzum addition. So we see from this, v'kel ha-Torah hu milifnei ha-tzimtzum. And kel ha-Torah ma'al, vahi kel ma'al rakia, is referring that the Torah is drawing a voice that is coming from higher than this tzimtzum. Milifnei ha-tzimtzum. Umamela nimshach ad lamata mamish. That's why it's nimshach all the way down below, because if it was coming through the tzimtzum, it's like with the kav, what is above does not come down below in the same level. The whole point of the tzimtzum and the kav is gradations, is to make sure that it regulates the flow, each level according to its needs. But if you're able to access the source of this Ohr Ein Sof in before the tzimtzum, and it's not subject to the tzimtzum, you're bypassing, so to speak, these regulators, and thus Torah is able to draw down lamata, a level of Ohr Ein Sof before the tzimtzum. And that's why it comes down all the way lamata, because it's not subject to the regular filters and regulators that the energy of Elokim, the energy that sustains, that creates and sustains and shapes existence, is subject to. Ukiyadua, and he goes explain this further. Ukiyadua, as it's known, the Torah kamei shehi lamata, hadihi kamei shehi lamai lamamish. Next page, 32. Torah is unlike the kav, and unlike the energy that flows through seder hishtalshlus. There, the way it's above is not the way it is below. We learned at length that the way it's in the reshis hakav, the top of the kav, or an ak, is higher than it is in akudim, and akudim is higher than akudim. Every level is different than one another. Torah is, if you want to compare it, is like, instead of being a local train, it's like an express. It bypasses these stations, so to speak, and the way it is above, that's how it comes down below. So it is, or as it is below, that's the way it is l'mayla mamish. V'lo kamei gili hakav. Not unlike the gili of the revelation of the kav, of the line, the thread of light that we've been discussing earlier. Sheyesh b'mayla mata. There, it's defined by mayla mata, by a hierarchy of higher and lower. Ve'ena dema b'seif hamshachasei, and you can't compare the end of its hamshacha, meaning the kav, at the end of its flow. You can't compare it to the kameshu beresh, the way it is at the beginning of its hamshacha. Like it is everything in this world. If you shine a light, even a very powerful light, the farther you go, the light becomes more and more diminished. Whether it's a torch, whether it's a flashlight, whether it's the sun. Same thing with the kav. Torah, on the other hand, is equal from the way it is above, from the reshis, from the beginning of its, the top or the beginning of its transmission till the end of its transmission. Because Torah is fundamentally bli gvul, not gvul. Arucha me'eretz midah. Like the pasuk says, it's longer than the measure of earth. Okay. So now we see how he's introducing different elements that we have in existence that allow us to reach and transcend the kav, which was the energy of existence, you can call it, and be able to draw down higher levels, namely the Ohr Ein Sof before the tzimtzum. Let me stop here for any questions before we continue the parentheses. So now comes a qualification. I'm on line 3 and page 32. Umasher kosa b'mokem achar. And what it says elsewhere, the Ika Gila Teru Dafka Lamata V'le Lamaila, don't we know that Teru is Leba Shamaymi? Teru was not given to heaven, it was given down on earth. That means there's a difference between higher and lower. The Teru is not equal above and below. It was given Dafka to come down Lamata. L'chein le'nitna Teru Malachim. That's where the Torah was not given to the angels. The whole sugi in Gemara and B'Shabbos, how the angels asked Hashem, Tanu heitcha al shamayim, give your Torah to us in heaven. the whole discussion and dialogue with Moshe Rabbeinu. Bottom line is the Torah was not given to angels; it was given dafka down on earth to the people, the neshamas begufim. So that seems to suggest Torah is recognizing a distinction between higher and lower. Here's the other way around. Here is dafka, the Torah is dafka for below, not for above. So he wants to qualify and explain how that is reconciled with what we just said, that the Torah, exactly as it is above, it comes down below, and it's below that, and as it's below, that's how it is above. So he says, Yesh leimer, dezeu dafka k'meshat Torah hi mushreshes ba'atzmus mamish. That this is referring, when we say that Torah was given dafka below, then we're talking about Torah, not in hishtalshlus, but Torah as it is mamish and atzmus, rooted in atzmus mamish. The bechina zu ef shel galus kim l'neshamas hameluboshes begufim lamata dafka. That level of Torah, meaning the etzem of Torah, the real etzem of Torah, the core of Torah, cannot be revealed only to the souls that come down in bodies down below. As shall be explained. This is going to be explained a lot later in Samach Vav, almost at the end, in the last discourses, when he gets back to Torah and the Shamas. But briefly, those of us that learned Ayin Beis remember this idea, where he spoke about that two things precede existence, Torah and Yisrael, right? Shnei dvarim kadmu le'elam. We say Breishis b'shvil Torah, Breishis b'shvil Yisrael, and then it goes on. The Tanit Ve'Elyahu says, I don't know which one precedes which, but then when it says Tzav b'nei Yisrael, Daber al b'nei Yisrael, that proves that neshamas are even higher than Torah. But there is a level of Torah that Reisa v'Kudsha Brichu Kul Echad, there's one with Atzmus. Except in between Torah and neshamas itself, neshamas are even higher level. But the neshamas higher level is not revealed until it comes down below, and they learn Torah down below, and through Torah, it will ultimately reveal the root of the neshamas. That's about neshamas. But Torah also has two levels. There's the Torah, because Torah is also learned in Gan Eden. The Malachim also know Torah. It was not given for them. The Torah is dafka given down below in order to make a dira b'tarteinim. The Torah is dafka below. That's the etzem of Torah. So the etzem of Torah is exclusively given down lamata, not lamayla. But what he's saying is, but that doesn't mean Torah does not have amshach of Ohr Ein Sof that is equal to what is above. That's how it is below. But we're not talking about etzem of Torah. Then we're talking about the giluyim of Torah. That's apparently what he's saying. Well, let's see how we'll read it inside. But just wanted to first. So now introduce the etzem of Torah connected to, rooted in Atzmus. Another parenthesis in the parentheses, and this will be the gili in the future. This too will be revealed in the future. The Torah chadoshim ite teitze chidushe Torah chulu. So the Asid will be revealed, not just the revelation of Torah, but the etzem of Torah. That's why it says there'll be a new Torah, from you, will derive a new Torah, Chidush Torah. Umakol Mokim, let's not make the mistake, Lo yeh Eida Pam Matan Torah. It doesn't mean there'll be another Matan Torah, God forbid. There'll not be another Matan Torah. There was one Matan Torah at Sinai over 3,300 years ago, in the year 2448. That's an expression of Chassidus. Lo yeh Oida Pa Matan Torah. B'hainu shetizgala Torah k'mo shehi b'b'chinas shashu hamelech b'atzmus mamash. So then what do we mean there'll be a new Torah? It means there'll be a new dimension of Torah will be revealed. Which level? The etzem of Torah. What he calls now shashuye hamelech b'atzmus mamash. We recall we used that term earlier when we talked about Tainug, the way it is in the etzem. It's called the delights of the king within himself. The loyoda inish erka. We called it before. You remember we said ayin loyrasa. I know I can see it. So now he's referring this to Torah, that a person cannot appreciate its cannot fathom loyoda Enesh erka, its measure. It's beyond us. V'raka lekim havin darka. Only God understands its path. These are all expressions in different verses that he's quoting, if you see in the footnotes. Similar to what we said earlier, that no eye can see it, only besides God. And because of this, meaning because this level of etzem will be revealed then, and who will be revealed to? The neshamas begufim lamato. That's why by tchias hamesim you'll indeed have souls within bodies. So today's souls in Gan Eden can learn Torah, but they're not learning the etzem of Torah. They're not learning Shashua Melech Batzmus like we learned. They're not learning Eden. They're learning Gan Eden. The Nor Hayotzema Eden, meaning the river that flows from Eden, not Tainug Haposhet Ha'atzmi. That will be revealed, as well as in Torah, and that's what it means that Torah is exclusively given down below. The etzem only dafka below, not above, not in the higher worlds where giluyim are what dominate. And then another parenthesis within this parenthesis, and we have a taste of this or a similar experience of this, gam achshav b'tzadikim. That today also we have a taste of this experience by tzaddikim. Tzaddikim g'delim be'esik teirasam, by great righteous men, righteous tzaddikim. Be'esik teirasam, when they are immersed and are engrossed in Torah. U'kamaymer alamcha tira b'chayecha, which he also brought earlier. U'kamaymer alamcha tira b'chayecha, that Elamcha, your world, you'll see in your lifetime. So Chassidus explains it means in our lifetime, even here, we can have a taste of that world of Elam Haba. And Tzaddikim G'delim, when they learn Torah, they have a taste of this level of Torah that we're discussing here. So all this comes to show you that even though these are the highest possible levels, and yet there is a taste of it, like we talked about the Beis Hamikdash, Shabbos, Torah in general. Now he's talking about the etzem of Torah, which is even higher than the Torah in general. Aval mitzad hagilui is the Torah. Now he goes back to the initial point. But due to the gilui eris, the revealed levels of light in Torah, that Torah exists in all the worlds. So that answers the question that he asked. He said, isn't Torah given dafka below? He says, yeah, the etzem of Torah. But the Giluim of Torah are in all the worlds. Ve'elam Atzilus, ve'gam elis biyah, in Atzilus, and also in the worlds of biyah. Va'idei neshamas, and through souls, harigam hamalachim, b'kablim me'er Torah. Through the souls, also the malachim, the angels receive the light of Torah. U'kamesha kosav chaverim makshivim l'keilach. It says chaverim, your colleagues, your friends. Makshivim, they listening to, and they're absorbing your voice. Makshivim, they're listening to your voice. That's the voice of Torah, that the Chaverim is referring to the Malachim, who are listening to the voice of Torah of Neshamas. Like it says elsewhere. So therefore, we have basically two levels in Torah. One level of Torah that's in all the worlds, and it's equal higher level to a lower level. And then there's the etzem of Torah, which is specifically and exclusively given to the neshamas down below. That will be revealed primarily l'asad love. But he hasn't finished yet. I see the parentheses is not finished. Just a second, let me see something. Yeah. I just want to see to where it goes. Oh, okay, another good few lines. Probably another 7-8 lines. So let me finish the parentheses, then I'll stop for questions. But let's just not lose sight of the plot. So what he's been saying is that Torah gives us comes from before the tzimtzum, and the Torah as it is below, it is above. unlike the kav, which is subject to tzimtzum and therefore to gradations, higher and lower levels. In this parentheses, he's introduced now the fact that the Torah is also specifically given below, and that's talking about the etzem of Torah, not the giluyim of Torah. So apparently, so far, it sounds like the giluyim of Torah exists in all the worlds, not just given down below. And there is what he would say, would apply what he said before, that there's an equal stature of Torah from above and below. But it's still not so clear. So let's see what he's going to continue to say at the end of this parenthesis. So he says like this, Ve'ech sheyeh. Eich sheyeh is an expression, however you explain it, this whole idea, Harimasha ikra Torah hu lamata dafka. That which we said that the primary Torah is dafka below, ein zeh mepnei shehi b'chinas midah v'gvul. So regardless of how you explain this, the difference between Torah below, Torah above, but the fact that Torah comes down below, you can't say is a question, oh, that means that Torah is a midah v'gvul. That's not the point. It's not. It's not because it's in a state of midah v'gvul, like the kav. The imkein hariyoye ikra gili l'mayla dafka. Because then the main gili of Torah would be above, like the kav. The light that's on a higher level is a more revelation, a greater revelation, more intense. So however you explain it, the way that when you say Torah is down below, which tells me that the question, the way I understood the opening of the parentheses, may be a little different than I understood it. I thought he was asking, he was qualifying, so what does it mean that Torah is dafka lamata and not lamayla, when you just said that the Torah is equal above and below? I think that question is still legitimate. But I think now reading this, it sounds to me there's another aspect to it, and that is, if the Torah is dafka lamata, that sounds like it's more subject to midah and gvul. You're telling me the Torah is coming from a bli gvul level, the Torah is dafka given below. Below, we are more defined than on higher levels. The neshamas in Gan Eden, the neshamas above are more bli gvul than the neshamas down below, which are confined in a body. I think that's, he's also adding that to the picture. So regardless, you can't say that either. Because then you have to say the Torah Lamayla is on a higher level than it is Lamata, and that's not the case. Like the Giluyim of Elamis, that the Giluyim that are on higher levels are higher than the ones that are on lower levels. Like we discussed earlier, according to the line that measures, the kav, the measuring rod, the measuring paintbrush, or artery that defines existence, according to that measure, it measures the energies and measures the containers, as we discussed earlier. That the earth should be revealed commensurate and proportionate to the containers, and proportionate to the worlds, to each world accordingly. Shehem kelim yesu l'gili Ohr Ein Sof. So the higher the worlds, the higher the level, they're more keli to the gili of Ohr Ein Sof. That's how it works in the kav and the giluyim of Elikus. And that's why, according to the energy measured by the kav hamida, the line that measures, the gili lamayla is much greater than the gili below. The main gili is above. Gili lamayla dafka. So when we say v'imkei mashateru hu lamata hu dafka lamata, when we say that the Torah was given dafka lamata, you have to say this is a very different track. It can't be that same track, because the kaf track is one that the higher it is, the more bright it is, the more powerful it is, and then it gets diminished. Here we're saying the Torah is given dafka lamata. That means the primary gili of Torah, the gili of Torah is lamata. So you have to say ein zeh mitzad. So when came mashatere dafka lamata ein zeh mitzad shenim dedal pimayim ar kav amida. Means it was not measured to the kav amida. It's bypassing that. It's a different track of energy, because if it was measured by the kav amida, then it would be subject to the same gradations and the same diminishments as the kav of creation. That's what creation is about. Creation is Atzilus is higher than Bria, and Bria is higher than Yitzira. Yitzira is higher than Asiya. The Torah is given Dafka and Asiya all the way below. So you have to say it's a different track. Elu inyan achar means it's a different inyan, it's a different track than the kav. Aval be'emes era Torah hu l'mayla mebchinas midav gvul. But in truth, the Torah is really higher than measure and finite parameters. That's why it comes down below mamish and elam atachten without any, not subject to any of the gradations that the regular divine energy that is part of existence is subject to. But bottom line, we have here the distinction. So what he's adding is another twist to the story, that besides the fact that we said that Torah is bleak vul, and it comes down below just as it is above, there's also an element of Torah as it comes down below, dafka below. And because it's not subject to midav gvul, it can come down below and be just as it is above, unlike the kav. In addition to what he said before, that the etzem of Torah is dafka below. So he's really saying two things here in this parentheses in explaining the idea. Regardless, he says, ech sheyiyeh, meaning however you explain it, bottom line is Torah is not the kav. It's a very different track. And that's the main point that he wants to make. And that concludes the parentheses that began on line 3 of this page. So it's rather long parentheses that qualifies a few of the points, which I think are pretty clear, but still I'm going to stop here just in case there are any questions. Are there? Okay. So we continue on. And now he's going to conclude and say as follows. And that's the reason that when a person learns Torah, they are immunized and given extra power than just the regular energy of existence. As he continues. This comes after the parentheses now. It says, a Talmid Chacham, or Talmidei Chachamim, plural, that scholars, Torah scholars, the fire of hell, of Gehenna, does not have any impact on them, does not have any control over them, does not rule over them. Kamoi b'Shabbos, like we say about Shabbos in general, about all neshamas, shagehenim noch b'Shabbos, that the fires of Gehenim, they are extinguished on Shabbos. They don't burn on Shabbos. It's only after Shabbos. Another Maimer Chazal, ve'en lecha ben chayrin ela mi she'esik b'Torah. No one is free except if they study Torah. Why is that the case? What is Torah? What does a Talmid Chacham have that a non-Talmid Chacham doesn't have? Because through the study of Torah, Ohr Ein Sof lamata, like we discussed, it's not the regular flow. You're getting an extra form of energy that's called Ohr Ein Sof. An infinite energy enters into this person who's studying Torah. Ukamayim Razal, like Razal say in the Mishnah, Shnayim she'eskim b'Torah shchina shruya. When two people are studying Torah, the shchina rests among them. What about when they're not studying Torah? So they have, God is everywhere. But they don't have that additional power of the shchina. Uminai, and the Mishnah continues, afila echad. Then it says, even one person studying Torah. How do we know? And it brings there a pasuk that even one person studying Torah also has an element of the Shekhinah that rests. And yet another Maimer Chazal. And God does not have a place to rest in His world except in the 4 cubits. of halacha, of Torah again. So because person has Torah and has all these qualities that we just described, that's why Gehenna's fire cannot touch him. He's immune to that. And he's a real free person. Because someone who's subject to the tzimtzumim of the giluyim of the kav, there's limitations. Like he says, in giluyim in existence, they do have measure and finite parameters. A beginning and an end and a beginning, like we discussed earlier. Because they have a beginning. So they have an end because they have a beginning. Because they're transmitted through the filter of the tzimtzum. So there, the fire of Gehenna can't touch. And they don't have the freedom because they are defined by this measure of energy. Torah introduces another level of experience that helps a person transcend the regular limitations of the energy within existence, to put it in simple terms. That's what he's saying here. So bottom line is that even though we're created through the kav and we're all finite creatures, we're given resources and tools and instruments that allow us to transcend the finite structures of our existence. That's what he's ultimately really getting at. And that will explain Rechava mitzvah ma'od, that mitzvahs are Rechava are very expansive in compared to L'chol Tichla Isi Kates, compared to the parameters and the bookends and the structure of existence. So this is very fundamental in the concept of how a human being can actually transcend their limitations. Because you could argue that we're finite mortals and we really can't go that high. There's a glass ceiling that limits us. But here we'll be giving divine tools that bypass, or you can say come from another track, that originate in places that are higher than the kav. Ohr Ein Sof lifnei tzimtzum. And that is what will give the neshamas begufim down below the power to draw down new levels of energy that the kav in the process of creation did not bring down into this world. In a concealed way it's there, but not in a revealed way. And that's ultimately how we transform this world into adira b'tachtenim, as we shall be learning, which is the central theme of Samach Vav. What our Avodah does in transforming this world and drawing down new and higher levels of unprecedented divine energy. Okay, so we'll stop here again. Any questions? Okay, so let's just continue. The new paragraph at the bottom of page 32. Ulefi mashin is bar le'il. Now he's taking us back. If you remember, ad va'ad b'chlal, ad v'lo yad b'chlal. Remember, he spoke about two levels of elevation. One is that one level leads you to the next level, ad va'ad b'chlal, until and included. And another is because there's a somewhat of an infinite jump, a paradigm shift. It's ad v'lo yad b'chlal. It leads you there, but now you have to take a leap. You have to some way nullify, some way divest of the earlier experience in order to experience a higher experience. So he's bringing us back to that topic now. He says, "Ulefi mashin is bar le'il," and according to what we learned earlier, what was explained earlier, being an ad v'ad b'chlal, v'ad v'lo yad b'chlal, the two levels that I just described. One is one level commensurate to the next, like climbing steps. One step leads you to the next. One rung of a ladder leads you to the next rung. That's ad v'ad. Ad v'lo yad is the rung leads you, but now you have to take a leap. And that requires a new level of bittul and so on. So he says, according to what we learned there, the bahagiluyim de seder hishtalshlus ad b'chlal, we learned that the giluyim and seder hishtalshlus are commensurate levels, one to the next. Mipnei shehem be'erech zeh lazeh, because they are proportionate and commensurate to one another. Ukeshe'emet b'madrega achas, and when you're standing on one level, harihu be'erech, next page, 33, It's commensurate to the next level, like literally like steps. You're on one step. Yes, the next step is a higher step, but it's not a paradigm shift. It's a higher step in the same domain where you are. So you're climbing. Hein mashalamata memenu. It's be'erech madrega acheres, be'erech both to what is below it. L'chein nikra oimid. That's why he said earlier that this is still called a stationary state, even though you are moving, but it's not really a halicha. What he called true movement is when there's a leap. So you're commensurate to the level below you, like when you go to the higher step, the lower step is just one step below you. It's commensurate, it's there. And it's commensurate also to the next step. So every step is commensurate to both the step below it and the step above it, like links in a chain. That's why the lower level, through it, it helps you understand and appreciate the higher level. Not in the case where you have to forget the lower level in order to experience the higher level, which we'll read about in a moment. And therefore, in this level, so based on this, every level that he's standing on, he's able to know the next level. It's just like when a person, again, climbing the steps. So yes, you're not on the higher step yet, but the lower step prepares you for the higher step, and the lower step also gives you have a vision and you have a perspective of the higher step, just like when you climb a mountain. So the horizon a little higher is higher than the horizon where you are, but it's not a complete quantum leap. So one level leads you to the next. Sheyeshlem kates v'seif. Because they have a kates v'seif, they have a beginning and an end. So everything is measured. He's still talking here the level of a measured steps, step by step, where the giluyim are commensurate to one another. We'll see where he's going with this, but that's what he, meanwhile, he said. Just 1 second. I want to just see something, please. Okay. V'zeu commotion is barley ill, b'pirish Rashi, b'pirish l'chol tichla. So he's now comparing it to what we learned earlier in Rashi, when he started l'chol tichla reisi kates. So Rashi said, if you recall, on page 28, he said, Rashi says, l'chol siyim dover yesh kates v'gvul. Everything has a measure. And he explained what that meant. Yes. So this is comparable to that. So, for example, when a person is standing in the middle of the space of the universe or the earth, Elam. So even though you can't see the end of the earth, but in his mind, you definitely can envision that there's a case, there's an end. Everybody knows right now, wherever you are, you can't see from one end of the world to the next. But your seichel tells you clearly there's a beginning and an end. This earth, as big as it is finite. That's why I was looking. I wanted to see the Gemara where he says, yeah, 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So therefore, when you're standing on one level, not only do you know that that level has an end, and that will lead you to the next level, but you also know that the next level also has an end, because you're all within the world of the domain of the finite. Even if you haven't reached it yet, you definitely know there's a limit to it. Because we're dealing with a finite entity, and all the levels are commensurate to one another. That's all hishtalshlus. But when you're talking about the energies that are higher than the cosmic order of this finite structure, they're in a state of bligvul, and they're not commensurate to one another. Canal, and because of that, it's ad. Yes, you reach until, but it doesn't include the next level. And in order to get to the next level, you have to free yourself. You have to erase. You have to be mavatl, the bittel of the lower level to get to the next level. And due to that, now it's a whole different perspective on reality. On this level, whatever level you're standing on, once you're in the domain of bligvul, you cannot say you see, even in your mind, that you imagine that there's an end to the higher level. Because you're not in that domain, you're not in that world. You're not be'erech, you're not commensurate to that higher level. The level where you're standing, you have comprehension. But this comprehension is not mamish like a yesh, because you're not in the world of the gvul. So two things he's saying. One is that every level is a distant level from the earlier level, and one cannot lead you to the next. You realize it's beyond you. Like we learned earlier, that the higher you go, the more you realize how Elikus is mufla, is wondrous, and more mystique as the higher you go. The second thing he's saying, that even the asogi you have is also not quite as tangible as it is in the world of Gvul. Like we also learned this, it's more abstract and more sublime. Chinas canal. Which means, why is it that way? Why is it somewhat elusive? Because you're not dealing with a very tangible entity. You're dealing with something, even on the level you're at, you're dealing with something that retains a certain element of beyondness, transcendence. So it's an element of Ein Sof. And now from this comprehension on this level, you do not know the higher level. You cannot say, from what I know on this level, I can comprehend that what the next higher level. On the contrary, not that you understand the next level, you actually understand its wonder, its mystique, its grandeur. You see something that's more awesome as opposed to understanding it. Like we learned earlier. How you cannot have any comprehension in it, including even abstract comprehension. The commotion is boily ill, because as we explained earlier, that the higher one climbs, the more they experience the awe, the awesome wonder of Atzmus. So we also learned the same thing is when you're in the levels of the ha'ara, in the reflections in the levels of bligvul. Every level he's at, he's seeing the wonder and the mystique of a higher level. That's not in the gather, not in the domain of comprehension at all. In any form of comprehension. And afterwards, when he comes and arrives at the higher level, in the manner of his comprehension, meaning every level more abstract than the lower level. Zehu they bitl mitzir say umuhus. So to get to that level here, it's not through the understanding of a lower level that leads you into the next level. Like 2 plus 2 leads you to 4 plus 4. That's commensurate. Here you're talking about a leap, and this leap requires a bitl of his mitzias muhusei addition. You have to divest, strip yourself, and suspend the previous personality and entity and identity. That is the truth, the way one reaches an infinitely higher, non-commensurate level. To reach a level that initially you had no relationship with. You want to reach a level that's completely beyond you. The only way is through bitl. And through the bitl of his identity, he reaches that level. That's why in this level you cannot say the isi kates, I see a beginning or an end. Because it's only up till here, but not the next level. So you can't talk about seeing an end because you don't see an end. Okay, you know what? I'm going to stop here. He's going to go back now to the Pirushim that he gave, the commentaries, Rashi and Ibn Ezra. And I don't want to overload. Let me just stop here. Yeah. Okay. Any questions? This was we covered a lot of ground here, but the summation of it is basically contrast between the experience of levels of Gvul and experience of levels of Bli Gvul. Very different experiences in their ability of relating to one next level to the next. One has finite parameters, and you can know that even if you haven't reached the edge, you know that it has an edge and end. And the other is a constant process of more wonder because it never has, because it's endless. And that is ultimately the levels that we experience through Torah and through mitzvahs, as we're going to learn soon. The Gilui Elikus from Lifnei Tzimtzum. But for all practical purposes, most of us are much more familiar, obviously, with Elikus, La'achar Tzimtzum, the Kav, the Midav Gvul that he's discussing here. Any questions? Okay. I was going to end the paragraph, but I'd rather wait because it's going to take a little more explanation here.
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
So the Rebbe Rashab is saying that I'm not sure if it's one of the ways or the only way to get to those infinite experiences is through bittul. Is he saying that's the only way or that's one of the ways?
Well, I don't know if there's another way. What other? I would say that is the only way.
Okay, no, I just wanted to know how to interpret it.
Yeah.
And then
yeah.
is he gonna go maybe later on in this mimer to give us some exercises in how to have that bittul in order to have the higher experience?
Well, he's already given us some. It requires not suspending your ego, not being so sure of yourself. It requires eliminating arrogance and everything that blocks us from growth. I mean, that's the most basic. The thing that most people do, which is more of themselves, here's the opposite of divesting yourself, being able to listen, being able to absorb. I mean, I'm sure he may talk about more examples and the avoid of it. We talked about in davening, before you davening, you're creating space. Remember, ein emdim lispal al metech keved reish, hachna v'shiflus, having a measure of modesty and putting aside, creating space for you to be able to absorb a higher level. So the things he spoke about, I'm sure there's all of Chassidus talks about how one achieves bittul. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll stop here. Close to the end of the paragraph on page 30.